I'm Doug Keck, and this is an EWTN bookmark. Our special guest, known to all, is Dr. Ray Guarendi, famous for The Doctor Is In and also Living Right with Dr. Ray. This time his book, as an author, is Raising Upright Kids in an Upside-Down World, Defying the Anti-Parent Culture. Great to see you, Dr. Ray.
Known to all. Don't you think that's
always
a bit of an overstatement, known to all? I mean, there's got to be people in Nova Scotia who might not know.
In relation to our viewers, at least, they might have some general idea, and if they don't, we're in trouble with who we're reaching and what we're programming, and we'll have to take a look at the ratings on your show now that you mention it. But this should be Raising Upright Kids in an Upside-Down World, Defying Hosts in a Culture of Media. But so it's a cute title. It's great. It grabs you. You write about these things. But it's also important because you have this subtitle, Defying the Anti-Parent Culture. Is that what we're dealing with today?
Something's got to explain why so many good parents are watching their kids go astray. What is happening? In most of human history, what you were raised with, you stayed with. Mom and dad raised you this way, you're going to stay this way. The clan, the tribe, the surrounding people, that's what raised you. Why? I would say 50% of the people I deal with, good people, watching their kids veer off and becoming actually hostile in many ways to the morals they were raised with.
Well, you say they're going astray. Maybe modern society would say, well, this is really the new path. And maybe the parents are kind of stuck in the past, and the young people are seeing a broader, wider, more tolerant world, and that's just where things are going.
That's what modern society says. That's why it's so treacherous. That's why it's so seductive. It would be one thing if it was just overtly hostile to the parent, but instead, it's very sly. You know, we are enlightened. We have morality that is superior to the morality of human history. And you children, we'll give you our morality through our movie, our media, our internet, our entertainment, our universities, our school. We're going to give you all this morality. And then something has to explain why guys like me have to pick up the pieces when those kids are in their 20s and 30s.
Well, you say here a lot of parents are hurting and confused. They ask, who is this? We didn't raise him this way.
I get that all the time. As a matter of fact, the #1 referral I now have, which is something I was never braced for when I started being a shrink, is parents coming into my office with 20-some-year-olds, 30-some-year-olds, 40-some-year-olds saying, how do I deal with this person? How do I deal with this kid? Irresponsible or immoral or hostile toward us, or mad at me because I took him to church. I believe that's an unprecedented phenomenon, Doug. It's unprecedented.
Now you say here, we didn't raise him that way. Is that because most of the problems are guys?
No. What I did in the book is nowadays you have to be linguistically sensitive. The police are out there all over the place for your language. So what I do is I alternate him, her, him, her, him, her. I hope somebody doesn't go in there and count, because if I have 2 more hims than a her, I'm going to be in trouble.
That's right. Now, you also mentioned here about even the idea of having, and you yourself having adopted, 10 children, right? The idea of a society that I think the number you say is maybe you're allowed 2 before you start.
1.86.
You start getting the looks, right? Yeah. And that's what you and your wife experienced.
Look at the irony. Look at the irony. You got a society that says, here's how children should look. But oh, by the way, we really don't want too many children around to look that way. I make the point that in our culture, there's a couple of sins left. Smoking, spanking, and having more than 1.86 children. Right. You can do anything you want morally, sexually, except have more than 2 children in wedlock. Then we start to give you grief.
Now, why is that such an issue for people? Is that because people are caught up in the ecology and we have too many people, they believe the old Paul Ehrlich lie about the overpopulation problem? Or are there people who are sitting there feeling guilty because you're reminding them that maybe I should have had kids or had more kids?
I would have thought that people were feeling guilty, but I don't think that's happening anymore. Okay. I think they view it as you're just irresponsible. And part of the rainforest being sucked up by all your kids breathing is one of it. But I think most of it is, how can you do this? What are you doing? How can you be responsible for 3 children? What about
it's
college? It's an and that's the irony. It's irresponsible.
Right. Okay.
I have even had parents accused of being Selfish.
Right.
You have 4 children? How selfish are you?
Right.
What an irony.
Well, it's interesting. I thought one of the ones you mentioned, a mother of 18 special needs adopted children said that with each child she received more swipes than support. I thought this was a great line. What are you trying to prove?
We got that. When we adopted the children, there were those people who said, what are you doing? Now, the guilt factor that you mentioned might be coming in there a little bit. But that kind of implies you have to feel some obligation. I don't think most people feel that kind of obligation.
Right. Well, the other thing you point out in here, present-day teen rebellion seems more cultural than biological. Even the word teenager is fairly new to the child-rearing lexicon, and that is, I mean, the whole concept really of a teenager, didn't that really come out in this post-World War II kind of world?
Can you imagine some farmer at the turn of the century thinking, you know, my boy's a teenager now. I can't get no help out of him. You know, all my other friends are kind of wrestling with their kids too. They're getting all obnoxious. They won't do nothing. I can't wait till these teen years are over. That never happened.
Right.
This kid was 14 years old. He was big. He was strong. He could help. This whole idea of the experts promulgating the notion that, well, you know, you just got to weather these years, Doug. I mean, your kid was sweet up until about 12. Now, this is a normal developmental phase where they're surly, snarky, snippy, snotty, and obnoxious. And that's just development. It isn't. You could, yes, hormones take over, and that does affect some. But this whole idea that teens are automatically just rebellious and nasty and difficult is more cultural.
Well, one of the things you come out in your book, obviously, is the apparent loss of parents' authority in relation to even dealing with their children, even when they're less than 18 years old. And is part of that just because the culture has changed so much in the way it looks at this kind of personal autonomy? Is it that the culture is trying to supersede the parents because part of the problem is the parents are the reason that these kids learn bad things because they have this Rousseau-like idea that everybody's born wonderful and the parents are making them bad, so society can make them good?
Inverse relationship. The tougher the culture, the stronger the parent has to be. At the same time that we've needed stronger parents, you've got this onslaught of experts telling them all kinds of ways to be gentler and more equal in your parenting and using certain types of communication. So the idea of a strong, and I'm going to use the word authoritative parent, that's not among the elite child-rearing people.
Right.
At the same time, the culture is becoming more hostile and difficult. I now tell parents, you've got to have a steel rod in your spine about that thick to stand up against that culture because it's not on your side anymore. This is not a farm in 1880.
Right.
You know, a parent will say, why is this kid doing this? And I said, well, he probably wouldn't have if you were a farm in 1880 because the opportunity wouldn't be there and the messages wouldn't be there.
Well, is that also because we live in a world where, for that age bracket today, it's all peer relationships and peer situation where, you know, you were dealing with kids living on a farm and it was really the family or the extended family that was really the construct for them?
They did a survey, I think it was about 1940s, and they asked the kids, who are your main influences? Number 1, mom and dad. They did the same survey in 1990. Number 1, peers. Now, see, that's cultural. That isn't developmental. You know, and by the way, television, I think, was number 2.
You mentioned here that people who adhere to traditional moral values are more likely to believe the media are a major influence. Well, one of the things, and you go through it here, I always find interesting, is when they try and claim that somehow the media doesn't influence. And I think if what's on TV and stuff doesn't change people's behavior, there's a lot of advertising people
They're getting ripped off.
Wasting a lot of money.
That's exactly what I said. I said the TV folks are ripping off the ad folks. If the ad folks are saying, I can influence you in 30 seconds, but the program can't influence you in 46 minutes.
Right. Well, how do they get away with that? You know, is it just that it's one of these things where, well, yes, you can see there's sort of a cause, there's a relationship, but there's no guarantee, or is it always, well, for some people, you can't say it's always this idea, well, everyone who watches, you know, things is not taking a gun and shooting people.
Yeah, and everybody who sees a commercial for an Audi doesn't go out and buy an Audi.
And they don't expect that.
But they know the Audi is there, and a certain percentage are going to buy the Audi.
And that's who they're targeting.
That's what they're doing, of course. Like this book. You know, nobody's going to buy this book except maybe my mom. But, you know, she'll know it's there.
Right. We got the order for the case, so you're good at least. You said, my college son Peter said to me, Dad, I thought this was just one voice telling me how to live. There are thousands out there criticizing you and telling me their way is better.
Yes.
And that's got to be
It's true.
emblematic of what goes on in households all over.
He recognized it. He's a pretty mature kid, so he recognized it, and he recognized that those voices are not something he wants to follow. But many kids, it's numbers. It is in the numbers. I always tell parents, your kid's going to look at you and say, how can you be right and all those people be wrong? And I always tell them to say, they are and I am.
Right. So is there a lot of fog out there, and do they still call you Old Ray?
My son was walking down the driveway with a couple of his buddies a few years back. I yelled out the window, "Hey, you kids, get off my lawn." He turned and he said, "Run, it's Old Man Ray." And one of the points I make in the book is, I don't want to be this dude that says, "Get out of my flower beds."
Right,
I don't want to say, "Oh my gosh, wasn't it great back in the 1620s, you know, when we died from all kinds of diseases?
Right.
Wasn't that wonderful? We didn't have to contend with the internet." It's not like that. There's a time warp, Doug. The technology soars ahead faster than parents can keep up with it. And by the time they recognize the downsides to some of the things we've created, it's already been an influence in their kid's life for 6 years.
Well, the thing that strikes me, and it's things I've saw in the 60s and 70s related to culture, the church in many ways, is that at the time when it's going through, people are being told, well, this is going to be a good thing, and maybe even believe it could be a good thing. But the problem is when it's shown later that it wasn't a good thing, nobody will admit it.
We're chronologically arrogant. We always think that our way is the better way, and all the people who came before us really didn't know that much. And it's a good thing we're here now, because we're IQ-wise a lot smarter than human nature used to be. That's our attitude.
Right.
And it seems to be with technology, if it's there, you accept it. And I make the point in the book with parents. I ask them, why do you allow this to happen? The number one answer, well, isn't that just the way it is? Isn't that what kids do?
Right.
Doesn't the average 6-year-old have a smartphone? I mean, they look at me perplexed.
That's what the kid tells you.
They look at me perplexed.
That's what the kid tells
Yes.
You know, I remember growing up as a kid, hey, we're going down to the stores with Billy and his friends, and my mother's like, no, you're not. We're like, well, he's going, I don't care, he's not my kid, you are. I don't like the people who hang out there, you're not going anywhere.
Look at that. Look at the blunt parental confidence. She didn't give you explanations. She didn't say, well, you know, sometimes Billy's not a good influence on you, Douglas, and I think it's important, you know, if I let you hang with Billy, you're going to grow up to run a TV operation, and I don't want that to happen.
Right, yeah. Mother was concerned about that as well, Mother Angelica, when I showed up. Now, it's interesting, you like play on words. So everybody, as a parent, you said, with Steel Rod needs resolve, but you also talk about resolving.
Resolving, yes, I do, because that's the summary at the end of the chapter.
Right.
It is resolved because it's strength, but it is also reassessing all that you've up to this point allowed. A parent will say to me, well, how do I change? Do I change all at once? Do I change a little bit at a time? And I always say, you change all at once for a couple of reasons. One, even if you resolve to change all at once, you couldn't. You're going to change a little bit at a time because of human nature. Second, if you're drinking spoiled milk, you don't say, whoa, that's spoiled. I think I better just sip it. You stop immediately. So if a parent says to me, giving her a smartphone at age 13 was the stupidest thing I've ever done as a parent, change it. Oh, she'd go crazy. You know, she'd resent me. Oh my gosh, I don't know what kind of reaction. I talk a story in here. I was raking the leaves, and this guy comes up to me. He's a neighbor. Did you see a girl come through here? How old? 14? No. Why? And then he just went, my daughter just ran away from home, and he took off. A couple hours later, I went to his door, and I knocked on the door. I said, any way I can help you? He goes, oh, she's back. And I went, you took her phone away, didn't you? He said, how'd you know that?
Really? That was it?
That was it. He said, how'd you know that? I said, the number one intense reaction to discipline by teenage kids is if the parent takes the phone away. Right. The parent will say, I've never seen him react like that. Right. I can give him an essay, I can ground him, I can fine him $5, I can take the license for 2 weeks. I take that phone, they go crazy.
Right. The other one you talk about is like interfering in a video game.
Did you see, okay, the example.
Right.
I thought it was fascinating.
Right.
I don't know if Jimmy Kimmel or one of those guys
Right, exactly. That's what you were talking about.
said, here's what I want you parents to do. I want you to walk in when your kid is playing a video game and just unplug it. The kids went crazy.
Right.
They had kids smacking parents, cussing at parents, screaming parents. These were 8 to 12-year-olds.
Right.
Now, you know, Doug, in television,
those are
you
the
got
worst.
you got to cherry pick.
Right, you got to pick
got
the
to cherry
ones that
pick.
are going to shock people.
But
right.
nonetheless,
Right.
even one punching a parent,
Right.
and maybe that's what they saw in the. At least they didn't zap them like they saw in the video game.
Right. So jet noise. What does jet noise have to do with dealing with cultural smog?
People will say, why can't parents recognize that this is happening? We moved into our home 3 miles from an airport. I remember thinking, I don't know if I can tolerate this jet flight path. This is these jets are louder than some of my kids. Mm-hmm. About a year later, people said, you hear jet noise? What jet noise? Yeah. You don't hear it. We have a safety mechanism in our senses. Mm-hmm. We simply start to block out things. Like you and I right now are getting assaulted by thousands of images all around us. Well, it's all gone. I don't see. I see you, and I hear you, but I'm listening now. There's sounds of air. Right. There's sounds of all kinds of things. It's all blocked out.
Right.
That's what we do to the culture. We just block it out. It's everywhere. You go through a grocery store line. Right at a 9-year-old's level are these sleazy magazine covers. Right. So this little 9-year-old's going.
Right. It's interesting, too, because I have an autistic son, and part of being autistic is the inability to block out all that information and to focus on one thing at a time, is a lot of times what those children have to deal with. Well, who's the parenting crowd, and who put them in charge?
The parenting crowd, sadly, has had two things influence them. One is the experts. I've talked about this in previous books. Mm-hmm. I think the experts have really done a number on parents, confidence, authority, result. That's one. When you get a majority number following a certain way, small example, average age of a smartphone now, what do you think it is? 8 to 10. Right. So that is now the number.
And it's interesting, too, because you make the point about kids having a cell phone and now kids having a smartphone.
You give a kid, you say you give a 15-year-old a flip phone. What's it do? How do you start it? Hello? Right. Hello? I'm calling children's services on you, Mom. That's what happened. I make the point in the book that never before have children dictated the direction. Interesting situation. About 25 years ago, mother came up to me and said, my son won't ride the bus. And I'm thinking, okay, some 8-year-old scared to ride the bus. Mm-hmm. How old is he? 17. Why won't he ride the bus? Right. He says, buses for geeks, dorks. He won't ride the bus. I said, what? No, he insists. I said, well, why don't you just make him ride the bus? Oh, no. It would be so ugly, so awful. And I said to her, you realize if the seniors are not going to ride the bus, pretty soon it's going to be juniors and sophomores. And that is really kind of the way it is now. Anybody who has alternative transportation, the kids dictated that. Right. Nobody else. The parents didn't go, well, I think we're just going to stop riding the bus.
You say kids think you should be guided by the numbers, right?
Unless the numbers are not in their favor.
Now, do you still like to carry 4 folding chairs at a time, or?
It won't hurt them. See, that is the standard rationale. Okay, they see that rot gut stuff. It's not going to hurt them. The kid's not going to go out and start shooting people from a bell tower. Mm-hmm. That's the rationale. And I drew the analogy of when I was 14, I put these chairs under me, and my dad said, Raymond, take those downstairs. Now, I know he wanted me to make 4 trips. There's no way I'm going to do that. Under the chairs. As soon as I hit the top step, up I went. I didn't touch anything till I hit the bottom. My dad came running. He says, you okay? I said, yeah, I think so. I'm 14. You bounce like rubber. Was it good for me? It didn't hurt me. Was it good to go down 12 steps and hit concrete? Of course not. And that's what I tell parents. I say, the question is not what harm does it do. The question is what good does it do?
I thought this was good, and it goes back to parents. Your rope's length is not measured against others. It's yours. You're the judge of what to allow, when, and how much rope is released or withdrawn. And then you move into the section called generation transformation. And the quote here is, every generation thinks things are worse now than they were when they were kids. That is the idea that society is in decline is nothing new.
That's the rationale.
Right.
Oh, come on. I remember when the Beatles came out. They were just that mop hair. Yeah, but what's happening now is the pace of the moral decline, of the relentless, nasty noise coming at parents is picking up speed. You know, the Beatles, yeah, okay, so they had mop hair. They also performed in suits. And Elvis, for all his gyrations, he sang gospel.
Right.
So you could say that generations have said, oh, these young people nowadays, they're all just gone to moral. But I think you have to judge it and say, okay, wait a minute. How much is the moral decline accelerating? And
right.
any clear-thinking person would have to say, we've pretty much decided anything goes.
Right, exactly. It's only when you have a snapshot and you put it side by side you realize how much change has actually really happened. I thought that you said you don't need to be a 1 in 100 parent to raise a 1 in 100 child. What does that mean?
Some kids cooperate more than others. And if you have a great kid, an easy kid, a moral kid, a mature kid first, it ruins you for the rest of your parenting because you think you're God's gift to child rearing. And then Chucky comes along, or Cujo. Yes, there are bad parents who have raised good kids. That happens. The nature of the person is powerful. But if you want to up the odds of raising a good kid or raising most of your kids good, then you got to be 1 in 100. And look at the numbers. If you're 1 in 100 by definition, you no longer have the majority looking at you and supporting you.
Right, exactly. That parent consensus parenting you talked about in the book. Let me ask you, you're dating yourself because you're referencing Leave It to Beaver, let alone Eddie Haskell, of course.
I said for those of you old enough, I made that qualifier in there.
Old enough to remember there. But, you know, these days, most parents would be happy if all they had was Eddie Haskell.
Yeah, there was as Weasley as he was, there was a certain confirmation to the society around him.
What was the worst thing he did?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Hi, Mrs. Cleaver.
Gave Beaver a hard time.
I was telling young Theodore.
Right, that's right. So, I mean, these days it wouldn't be so bad. So in that way, you also make this interesting analogy, and you're talking about a child in the sense of a Dorothy out there who already thinks she has the Wicked Witch of the West for a mother and Attila the Hun for a father. So it feels as though you're only boasted at an image by seeming too rigid or too unreasonable. And even sometimes in the church we hear these accusations about rigidity.
Parents are afraid of their child's resentment. As a result, to stand strong against this culture, the child, understandably, being a child, 12, 13, 14, 15, will look at the culture and say, what's with you? Why are you like this? Nobody else is like this. And the parent gets nervous because the shrinks have convinced them, okay, your child's hostile now, but you don't know what's going on up here. You know, this is the 22-year-old who's going to look at you and say, I'm never darkening the doors of a church again because you made me do that.
You know, it's interesting. I remember one experience, I probably said on other shows in the past, where there was a discussion about sex ed at a particular school, and it was all this big push about how it should go, and it was sort of like 5th grade. And I can tell you that if the parents in that room could vote in private, they would have voted against it.
Yes.
But the peer pressure from the school and from each other not, and the fact that if you vote against it, then your kid is the one who gets ostracized.
We talk about peer pressure for teens. Well, nowadays we got a heck of a lot of peer pressure for parents.
Right.
And I always tell parents, if your kid is going to go off in a direction, make sure it's because he went over top of you, not because you stepped aside and said, here.
Gotcha. Now also, and just before we go into closing minutes, you talk about addiction. Strictly defined, addiction includes 3 features: craving, dependence, and withdrawal. Craving is an intense desire. You go on to explain it. But it seems like today, and some things are, but it seems like every wrong behavior to some degree gets excused by claiming it's an addiction.
Addiction implies you have really no responsibility. Right. I'm driven.
Right.
So we say things like, well, my kid is addicted to his cell phone. I'm addicted to watching movies. I'm addicted to playing the slots. We stretch it so far.
Right.
It's part of this universal fallen human nature. I gotta justify my behavior, and I'm going to justify it. There's a phrase in psychology. anything can be a justification for something you really want to do.
Right. Great rationale, you know, the ability to come up with that. And seems to be, isn't that what a lot of it's all about? It's all about, it's not my fault. I don't want to be held accountable for this. So is that why we see, you know, so many diagnoses, so many medications? And this is somebody who's talking, who was lucky that there was advancement in dealing with autism.
Your son's situation was developmental.
Right.
Okay. When you get into the realm of psychology or personality or behavior habits, and it gets fuzzy.
Right.
You know, how aggressive is too aggressive? What makes a narcissistic personality versus a narcissistic person or behavior? The boundary starts getting fuzzy. And the more we want to look at, well, you know why he does that? Because he has anger management issues. That's why he does that. Well, how do you know he has anger management issues? Because he does that.
Right.
Why does he do that? Because he has anger management issues. It's the circle.
Right, and again, I think some of it has to do with the fact of the input from the outside, plus you're dealing with broken relationships, you're dealing with single-parent families, you're dealing with two people working together.
If I put a name to it, Doug, the implication is I understand it.
Right.
You know, when we say somebody's diabetic, we can measure that.
Right.
But if I say he's oppositional defiant disorder, what did I just explain? I didn't explain anything. I just said he does a bunch of stuff that somebody has judged too extreme and too intense.
Right, but at the same time, for me, it means it's a medical condition that I'm not responsible for.
Sure, yeah, my parents will say that to me. I finally found out what's wrong with my son. He has oppositional defiant disorder. And I'll say, you didn't find out anything. You put a name to it.
Right.
Now what are we going to do about it?
Right, exactly. Well, people can find out by reading your book, Raising Upright Kids in an Upside-Down World, Defying the Anti-Parent Culture.
Don't you like the way I said defying the anti-parent
You're
culture?
our leader in that defiance. And thank you so much. The one and only Dr. Ray Guarendi, host of The Doctor Is In, Living Right with Dr. Ray. It's a book available through our EWTN Religious Catalog, proudly published by EWTN as well. EWTNRC.com is the place to find it. And you'll find Dr. Ray on EWTN every day. Thanks for joining us.